Celene, I have a question for you before we get into anything. How many hours how many hours of work a week do you find gives you the best productivity?
Ooh. Well, for me, I would say because I am, at home with the toddler and balancing so many other commitments, usually I would say a good 20 to 25 hours of like sit down solid work. And then I like snatch a few little bits and pieces of work on my phone throughout my day, which I think is a really good balance for me to catch up on all those small things so that when I do sit down, I can just, hammer through what's really important or focus on my meetings.
Okay, awesome. So 20 to 25 hours a week. That's an interesting answer. Now, a lot of people believe that the more hours you work, the more productive you will be. So, as someone who has worked anywhere from 5 hours a week all the way up to many, like, I don't know, like 12 to 14-hour days every day, I know when you were working as a real estate appraisal analyst. Why 25? Why 20 to 25?
Well, like I said, because I am, at home with a toddler and balancing that, those also add in to my kind of work day where I know a lot of people try and do that on top of it. And especially when Adair was a newborn, I was a person who got up, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. I started work at 4 a.m. I worked from like 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 till whenever she woke up. I worked all through her naps. And then the second she was in bed, I like worked again till midnight. And, I may have only even at that time, okay, not midnight. I don't know why I said midnight. There's no chance I was up till midnight or then up at 3. But I did work basically after she went to bed until I crashed myself. And so even then I was probably still doing about 20 hours a week of work. I was just also being 100% full-time mom in addition to it, which I know a lot of people are now doing with COVID. Um,
Yeah.
but it's all about taking into consideration everything that's going on in your life as a whole. Pre-kids, like you said, I worked like 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. If you include commuting and stuff, I would be either working or driving to and from work. And it's honestly like looking back, I can see how it affected me and how it affected my life and how it was totally horribly bad for me. And that was pretty much all I did was work every single day.
And did you get, so, let's say we're talking about somebody else who perhaps isn't a mom, but is trapped in that kind of 60 hours a week or something, were you getting, how much more were you getting done? Like, were you getting 3 times as much done with 3 times as much time to work during the week?
Definitely not. Well, I mean, not only definitely not because I was exhausted and burnt out and everything else, but also I just wasn't as an efficient worker because the workplace that I was at was set up so that there would be long periods of waiting on people for stuff or random like hour and a half meetings during the day where absolutely nothing happens or, a lot of office chit chat. Even though I was like at work or driving for 60, 70 hours a week, I mean, there were days where, we were cramming for a court case or some sort of deadline where I was like, and my brain was going numb and I was just, instead of sleeping at night, I was just having work mares. A lot of it was just empty, useless time that I could have spent way less time at work if I'd just been more productive.
All right, very interesting, very interesting. Well, you may have guessed, Celene, not just because the notes are in front of you, and we chatted about it just before this call started, but to all of our listeners who are out there, you may have guessed, today we are talking about working hours, productivity, and wellness, because this is something that a lot of us need a lot of love in this area, 20, 25 hours a week, 60 hours a week, the norm, I think it's a little bit more towards the latter end of things. What do you think, Celine?
I would say so. I mean, it depends on the type of job and the type of role too, because a lot of agency owners, they literally take their work home with them. Either they start, they work from home regularly and they start and finish their workday at home and stay home all day, or they come home and they work a lot more. They're answering emails on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. I actually know people who do that. I've received emails from people on a Saturday at 2 a.m. And so agency owners are really, because, your business is your baby, you don't want it to fail, especially if you are a solopreneur or a small team. So much of running a business is on your shoulder. And or on your shoulders. Most people have two shoulders. Um, but there's, that mentality too of your kind of regular work days where you do your regular, say, project work or whatever you consider your main role. But then in all the little edges and corners of your life, you're trying to squeeze in like the marketing, the admin, the sales, the high level relationship building, the, getting your new website launched that you said you'd do 4 or 5 years ago, whatever other projects are going on, those always seem to bleed into the extra hours of the day and not what you may consider kind of your main workday period.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And, I think both of us have spent most of our adult lives in jobs that really just demanded more all of the time. I think you in particular, coming from more of that kind of corporate background, it's almost like, and I know we've chatted about this on other episodes before, the more you work, the bigger your achievement. You must be getting more done. You must be more important. You must be achieving more because you are putting in those extra hours. And, I hope that most of the people listening to this podcast at least have some inkling or some doubts around that maybe it's a bit of a fallacy. But we want to spend some time ripping apart today, just that concept in general and talking about nurturing habits of wellness, because not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because as humans, we want to make sure that the other humans in our circles and in the world are supported and healthy and, having their needs met, but also because it flat out leads to better work when properly managed, in my opinion. Better wellness means happier people, better work, more longevity, less burnout. There's just so much positive stuff that encapsulated in it, but it's not as easy as it may seem. What do you think as our chief of ops? How's the journey been?
I totally agree. And I know we kind of started off talking about it in ourselves as leaders and having experienced it in the workplace where, it's a badge of honor and you're almost rewarded by your boss or whoever for being the person who's sticking around till 7 p.m. to finish up your TPS reports. I hope everyone got that reference. But it's also, as leaders, it's important to nurture that attitude in your team as well. I mean, for us in particular, we attract people with a high level of passion and what we call give a damn. And that means they have other, in addition to working for us, they have other projects on the side, or they have their family they're helping out, or whatever else, competing with their energy. So to expect someone to work, I mean, not that we would ever expect anyone to work 60 hours a week, but even to expect somebody to work 40, 45, 50 hours a week and also do all these other projects on the side. Like we've experienced it where, people on our team, sometimes we use the term crispy, getting a little burnt around the edges when we can start noticing signs of burnout. And I've also talked to, other ops or agency leaders who are experiencing this with their own team, where they said, hey, I can see this person who's overexerting themselves in their personal life as well as at work, and it's affecting their job, but I'm not sure where it's appropriate to talk about it. Is it appropriate for me to tell them to set personal life boundaries? Like someone I think I was talking to, they had a full-time employee who picked up a second part-time job on the side, or who was, I think in another scenario, was helping a parent heal through an injury or something, where you want to be obviously compassionate to that. But where is it kind of your business to step in and hold your team accountable to wellness? I mean, those are kind of two examples, but sometimes people just have nonprofit work or passion projects or hobbies or whatever it may be that take up a lot of their energy without really realizing that they're not, I mean, maybe not hobbies, because hopefully the hobbies help nurture their wellness, but that they're not taking time for themselves.
Yeah. And, I can speak to this and might have even brought it up in another episode or two. But I think you were the one who even pointed this out for me, Celene. When I first cut my hours, I mean, there were basically two big cuts. One was from 60 down to, actually kind of within the 40 range mostly. And then the other one was from the 40 range down to more into the kind of 20 range, which is where I am now. And when I first cut my hours down to 20 a week, I actually burned out more that year than I'd ever burned out before. And the reason for that is because when I was working, and I don't know if this is the same for everybody, but when I was working those really long days, really long hours, I had such constraints on myself and on my time because I literally could not work on the weekend, for example, and still be productive the next week. Like if I was working 12-hour days every day from Monday to Friday, I could not then work 3 or 4 hours Saturday and Sunday and go back to work on Monday because I wouldn't get anything done. And I needed to be productive on Monday. So I didn't work weekends. Or for example, a lot of the time I had like zero energy to give out. So I said no to a lot of things. I said no to many things I wanted to say yes to. So no to maybe some social gatherings. Social gatherings. Just, little moment of goodbye for those. But all these different things. And then when I actually cut my hours down to 20 a week, I removed a lot of those constraints for myself. So I was like, sweet, I have time to do all this other stuff. So I was like giving community workshops around budgeting. I was, meeting up with people and doing all of this extra stuff. I started doing spoken word poetry and all this different type of stuff. And I actually ended up more burnt out and stressed, not just because I took on all of that additional personal stuff, but because what I realized in cutting my hours to 20 hours a week, and this is what you've really helped me see, Celene, is that I mostly had cut out a lot of the chaff time. So as someone who is super self-motivated with all these meetings and stuff, in those 20 hours, I was still getting almost the same amount of stuff done. Maybe just a little bit more focused, a little bit better at delegating, less filler stuff in my schedule, but I was still doing all of the hardest work and all of the most important work, and then filling my life with twice as much of that just on a personal level, and then wondering why I was burnt out. So I think this is one of those things, especially if you or the people on your team are overachievers or just ultra high achievers, that there's some things to consider here as we get into it.
Yeah. And for those of you who are either listening or watching and have obviously not been in Say and I's personal meetings, many, many times over the past couple of years, I've whipped out my famous stern, scoldy, pointy finger and said, Say, you're doing too much, or like say no, or I'll hold you accountable. Say like, how are you planning on balancing this with your wellness and making sure you don't burn out? Yeah. And you'll be like, oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, and some of it is, habits. I really just want to point our attention here. Habits of Wellness and the Team really is about building habits. And we all know that building habits can be challenging and is just so much more successful if it's if it is achieved through a little bit more strategically. If you just go and try to say, I'm going to start today and I am going to brush my teeth after every meal, exercise twice a day, wake up at this specific time that's 2 hours earlier every day, and also like start meal planning, you're probably not going to get all of those things done, even if you are an overachiever like me. Maybe better to start with 1 week or 1 month working on the time you wake up, another week or another month, or, if you're following the science of habits, I'm having a brain fart, but I want to say 60 days is where that kind of magical space is, where habits start to become gelled. This isn't just about why it's important. It's about how we can actually build those positive habits. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes.
Yeah. And I think, you said about why it's important in building habits and stuff. And I really want, before we kind of go any further, is to emphasize that this happens at kind of a company structural level. This isn't just like something you like pop in once in a while, like once a year. You're like, oh, by the way, remember to like be well or have wellness or take rests. It really has to be part of your entire company's culture. And I mean, for us, like other than the fact that and I think you brought this up kind of early on too, is we want to be a good company that people love to work for. And we have a team that we're all very close to each other and we love each other and they love working for us. And it makes you attractive as an employer if you can say, hey, we have 30-hour work weeks or whatever it may be. But it really, really, really is also about the bottom line. I mean, my job as chief of ops is like, I like to pretend I'm so nice and I do care about my team. But like when I put my boss hat on, like really my job is ensuring the bottom line and ensuring we're productive and effective. So also, taking a look at this critically, all the stats and data and information show that when people are well rested and are actually focused and productive, fewer hours is more effective and more profitable. Because I'm a huge nerd, I actually like pulled up some stats here. Um, is that in a CDC report that it actually analyzed 52 different studies on the topic, because I don't have time to read 52 different studies because I work smart, not hard. Is that after like 8 hours in a day, people start making not only more, but bigger mistakes that affect your productivity, affect your client relationships. People are also, they're going to take way more sick days. They're not, when I'm sure, hopefully, none of this is news to anyone listening, but stress affects your immune system and lack of sleep affects your immune system. So people are more likely to take sick days either because they're getting sick more often or for mental health reasons. And also they're just less productive in general because I've also been guilty of this, like, when you're sleep deprived or stressed, like reading the same page 5 times before it like actually absorbs into your head, or procrastinating or taking way too long on something because I'm not mentally clear or focused.
Yeah. Yep. Or even this happens to me a lot. If I'm not mentally clear or focused, it's harder. Like I have to rely more on kind of my to-do list and those structures and stuff. And it's easier for me to just spend an hour chatting or doing something that, is a minute, or messing around in my email, when actually I had something that was a lot more critical that needed to happen. But because it's not necessarily at the forefront of my brain, because my brain is almost shutting down underneath all the different things it needs to think about, or just because I'm tired. And this is something, that is not in this data, and I did not look up, but I've recently been reading a book on stress called When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. Incredibly amazing book. Highly recommend it. A little bit heavy because it gets into the physiological link between stress and illness. So there's a lot of illness in today's society, so that can be a little bit heavy, but just so good. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in that book is they basically go through this test and find out that the more you are stressed and in a state of stress, the more sensitive you become to stress. Not just because your body is hijacking your entire immune system to basically make you run away from a lion that is actually an email or something that you can't run away from, but because the more and more it does it, basically the more sensitive it becomes to stimulus. So you actually become literally more sensitive to pain and other physical things, but also to stress itself, which is also why, as I've kind of burned out more over the years and kind of bounced back and went back into it, I've burned out harder and faster because my body is like, well, you're not listening to the messages, so we're going to send you stronger messages. And I know it's so deep in our culture to just work more and embrace stress. And I'm not saying that stress is always bad, because it does have, real purpose in helping to kind of motivate us and get us going sometimes. But being in a state of chronic stress, which is the norm for a lot of agency owners and people working at agencies, is not good for your health. And what Celene is saying is that it's also just not good for the actual business and your productivity. Chronic stress in particular. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah. And especially in places that I've noticed that are more kind of stressful driven, high intensity workplaces, employee turnover is so high because people get burnt out. And then whether it's that they just get so burned out that they can't handle the job anymore, or they quit, or they're stressed, so they're snippy and argumentative and have conflict with their, whoever their supervisor is, and end up either quitting over the conflict or getting fired from it. These are, other kind of little, I don't know, auxiliary is probably not the correct word, but like side effects of stress and how it affects the workplace. Because everyone knows, like, hiring, training, all that stuff is not cheap, and it's not super efficient because people don't get up to their full capacity till maybe 3 months or 6 months, or depending on the job, it takes time to train and learn.
Even an A player. Yeah.
Yep. And also, like, as someone who does all the hiring and training, like, it's kind of a pain in the butt and takes away from your productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Okay. So I think we've gotten in, and, there are tons. I know you only mentioned, one study that looked at 52 different studies here in one book, but there's so much data on this. It's one of those things where it's just a pervasive cultural myth that we like to make excuses for the data, also because, we're often in states of chronic stress and we don't see a way out of it. So let's shift our focus a little bit, because there's so much data and studies out there if you just go look, to how do we address this? How do we start nurturing positive habits around stress in ourselves and in our organization?
Yeah, so I would say there's basically kind of two main branches of ways that you can address this, both culturally and structurally. So in terms of culturally, that focuses on, empowering your team to build better habits of self-care, being able not only as a leader to identify their burnout early, but to train your team to be able to recognize burnout in themselves early, take actionable steps to prevent it and address it, and normalize talking about it. I
Yes,
think is a
that's
big
critical.
one.
Yeah.
So I mean, we'll talk about this, in more detail later, but that's kind of the first one is culturally. And then structurally is actually about implementing processes and systems that kind of like it handles it from a top-down perspective. So it takes responsibility off your employees' shoulders to be responsible for, I mean, they should be responsible for their own wellness regardless, but it takes it kind of to a more structural level. So whether that be like a 4-day work week or a 7-hour work day or things like that, where you're kind of forcing them to not be workaholics, or even, I mean, again, we're gonna talk about this later, I'm getting off topic, but waggling your finger when you see them on Slack answering questions at 9 p.m. on a Saturday. um,
Or at least calling them out a little, not like shaming them in
yeah.
front of the whole team or something, but being like, hey, I have definitely done this before. Being like, hey, why are you answering messages right now? Go to bed. Like,
Yeah, or go watch TV or go do whatever like hobby they enjoy.
yeah, totally.
And
And
everyone's
just,
so used to
oh,
my like stern, friendly finger waggle that they take it pretty good.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I just want to add, on the real talk front, because I think culturally and structurally are really important, and we'll get into them and stuff. But I also want to say that there's no avoiding the people part of the equation. And what I mean by that, and this means you, is that if you yourself are not doing the work and exemplifying the work, even if it doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but you just have to be doing the work and being honest and open about it. That goes so far, whether it's culturally or structurally or both. Just making sure that the people part of it, so not forgetting you, making sure that you are living by example as much as possible. Even in making mistakes and stuff, that's part of living by example. That's what really inspires people. Just being a perfect paragon of everything forever is actually quite intimidating for people, and also really hard and impossible to maintain. Or if you do fall or you do mess up, you fall real hard and mess up real bad. The other thing is, and this fits into both culturally and structurally, is hiring, right? Making sure if somebody is coming to you and they very obviously have a huge history of burning themselves out, just make sure you're aware of that and asking yourself some questions around that. Because it's very hard, just like with all other, this is, I think, the cultural piece, but it's easy to train somebody to have very specific skills. It's hard to train somebody to have different values. We had to change how we approach things culturally and structurally, looking at who the types of people that we hire and who thrive with us are. Because in the end, we can make rules and policies and talk about culture until the cows come home, but if it doesn't actually fit with the values of the people who are working for us, then we're wasting our time.
yeah, that's so true. And I think what you're talking about, hiring and values, is amazing and so very much on point. I want to kind of add to what you're talking about in terms of leading by example by saying that, first of all, it's really important because if you are telling your team to take time for themselves and to not overwork themselves, but you're do that, well, I haven't taken a vacation in 10 years and all, that kind of attitude, it kind of makes people feel bad about if taking time for themselves. So it's important to be vulnerable because I'm sure everyone listening to this probably already overworks themselves. Or if magically you've already come to the cure for it and a perfect balance, then probably don't need to listen to this podcast, but we'd love your insight. Maybe be a guest in our show.
Yes, yeah. Please let us know. What's your secret? Email us.
Yeah.
Call us. Yeah, we want to know.
Like most realistically, like you also either currently suffer or have suffered from burnout. And by addressing it openly with your team, it brings awareness to how it affects people, makes it more acceptable to talk about these things, and it removes the shame aspect from your team. Because people might really, feel uncomfortable saying, hey, I'm feeling burnt out. I'm at the end of my rope. I've overexerted myself. I'm feeling really overwhelmed, things like that. when it's not the cultural norm, where, you know, especially if they're newer on the team, or maybe they're just not if there isn't that kind of culture of being able to be open about your feelings, saying that to your boss, because you wonder, is my boss going to judge me for it? Is my boss going to think I'm not a good employee or a liability for it? But if you're talking about it as a leader, they know it's okay to talk about it because they've seen you talk about it.
Yeah. I would say it also helps you have greater empathy for your team, in the sense that, and I'll be the first to admit, you know, we talk about a culture of wellness, culture of wellness, culture of wellness. And then sometimes I'm really crap at that. And sometimes too, like, people come to me and I have trouble being compassionate towards them about struggling about that thing. And then I remember, oh, I struggle with that thing too. And that provides me with a pool of experience to draw from, to create that connection, also to communicate with them, to help problem solve, to navigate what's going on. You know, it's not just about creating an example for them to follow. It's also about giving yourself a pool of resources to problem solve from, straight up. You know, a lot of the time, especially as your team, and, you know, a lot of our listeners kind of vary from between being solopreneurs to running teams that might already be 8, 10 or more people. And I found that at the beginning of it, you know, when it was mostly just me, and I say beginning, but, you know, different people's mature sizes look in different places. But when I was a solopreneur, I struggled when I started having other people on my team, you know, even just as contractors and stuff, coming from that place, to have compassion for them, because I was always working maximum, you know. And so sometimes it's like, well, why aren't other people putting in their all or doing their extra, or et cetera? But then as I started to do the work, number one is I started to realize that it's not easy. You know, easier said than done. It sounds easy to be like, oh, well, we're just going to work 30 hours. We're just going to work 20 hours. But in practice, that comes with a lot of other stuff. And some of it is mindset based. You know, if I don't want to do, and you know, this is, let's say, an example, even just from my home, which is that as someone who's used to doing a lot of the care and support around my home, in terms of like, you know, like dishes and chores and cooking and etc. When I started seeing somebody and we had to navigate, we moved in together and we had to navigate what that looked like, you know, if I wanted to no longer do the cooking, that required me to come to terms with the fact that I'm also not always choosing what we're cooking. It's not going to be cooked in the way that I like, all of this different stuff. And sometimes there's some back and forth that you can have to make that, you know, better aligned. And sometimes you just have to suck it up. And it's a similar thing, you know, when you're navigating this wellness and tasks, like there's this delegation, et cetera. But also when I'm like, well, you're overworking, you're doing too much, I can be like, oh, so let's talk about that. Are you taking on too many things in your personal life? You know, are you overcommitting yourself to bigger outcomes? Are you maybe just overcomplicating things? Or are you afraid sometimes to delegate because you're afraid that it's not going to be done the way you want it to be done? So it opens up, doing it yourself and making sure you're doing the work yourself just opens up so much in terms of perspective, I think.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that kind of leads into talking to your team and holding them accountable to wellness. But I just wanted to add one thing first, that, you know, as a leader, if you are working 60 hours a week, but trying to uphold a culture of, you know, wellness and not overworking yourself, it's hard, because if you're working 60 hours a week and you see someone going on vacation or having an easier time or having a life, like, you feel bitter. Like, I hate to say it, but it's true. Even like when I was working 60 or 70 hours a week, I fully chose it. I could have chosen a different career path. Well, I mean, obviously I did now, or a different life, but then seeing people like, oh, they're going on vacation to Europe for like a month or something. I'm like, I haven't been out of the country in 5 years, except for the States. But you know, it's like, you, not only is it important to exemplify it for your team, but also for yourself. But anyway, that was just like a quick little side, but I did want to talk about, you know, implementing this culturally, because you started talking about that, is holding people accountable. And so if you just start doing this out of nowhere, you might get not necessarily pushback, but your team giving you weird looks or feeling like you're being inappropriately personal with them or whatever. So it really needs to be something that's part of your team culture and value. And if you're going to introduce it suddenly, preface that. Say, hey, just so you know, I've realized that we don't talk about wellness enough. So I'm going to start asking you questions like, what have you done in the past week for self-care? And it's not because I'm being creepy or weird, but this is just, I want to make sure that we're all talking about this. And, you know, bring it up first. Like, don't just start asking weird questions that people aren't used to if it's not the culture. Because people, for me, like on our team, they're used to Sarah I saying, hey, you look like you're burning out, or you look like crap. No, I've never said it to somebody.
Or are you sure? This is a big one as we get
Yeah.
better at identifying, like now we deal a little bit less with burnout. We deal more with the crispy, which is, I define as that 20% before a burnout where you're into your energy reserves and it's usually obvious to the people around you, but not always you. Now we're starting to identify it's just like, well, is that really something you want to commit to? Is that really something that you have the capacity to do? Is that really something you should be doing, or is that something you should delegate? And I find that, like, when we talk about culture is this really vague word. So I do want to kind of real talk it and bring it down to earth, especially with some of these handy things that you have suggested. But part of it is making it, as we've been talking about, part of the communication, part of the conversation on a regular basis. But part of it is having kind of a bank of solutions and questions that you can draw from. So this idea of, starting to identify and recognizing the signs, which can often be someone who's really even-tempered, can be a little bit more short-tempered, just straight up, as a leader, you start to become more aware for what people's capacities are, in the sense that not like how many hours, we're not talking like utilization rate or something like a really operations focused metric. We're talking about, if somebody is already taking on a few ongoing projects and that they usually carry like 2 to 3, but they're setting a goal to carry 5. Or they've just said yes to something and just giving them a little bit of a check on that yes. Like, is that really something you want to be saying yes to? Is this something somebody else could be doing? Is that your role? This is something I ask sometimes, like, is that really your job or your role? Not like, oh God, I shouldn't be doing this. But, as chief of marketing, is that an admin thing?
As automated.
Yeah, that's a big one too, right? Like, is that something that could be automated? Is this a problem that needs to be solved now? Sometimes you can, especially when you're in that crispy zone, someone can start freaking out and trying to create a solution or something. And it's like, wait, actually, this isn't our problem solving time. This is our problem identifying time. We've identified that problem. Let's put it on the problem solving list for the problem solving time. And it's really, note that a lot of these aren't big things. These are little things that help support the habit and build the culture. Prioritizing. A big thing, this is actually something that I encourage the team to do, that I do, is making shorter to-do lists. Now, this could be a structural thing potentially, but I approach this as a cultural thing. If somebody has a massive to-do list, I do this with my agency partners on calls and stuff as well. It's like, I feel overwhelmed. I have so much stuff to do. Let's just make a list. Okay, now that we've made the list, okay, you've heard us. I think we talked about this in like the change in many episodes, but it's just making a list, identifying what the most important things on the list are, no more than 3, putting those in order and banking the rest of the list. So you don't have to overthink or overcommit or expect that you're going to get 7 things done today. Because most days, most people do not get 7 things done. Most days, most people get 1 to 3 things done. Like big things,
And it's also just, it's overwhelming, and it's a mental load to carry all those things. If you could just put them aside and be like, I know they're written down, I don't need to think about them, just already you're going to feel so much better.
Yeah, because then you're juggling 3 things that are going through your head instead of 10 things, right? Like, the more stuff you're like, our brains, I know I've said this before and I'll say it again, is that our brains are really meant to be RAM, not hard drives. This is an audience that actually understands that, thankfully. But it's meant to be short-term memory, not long-term storage. And if you have too many things going on at once on your computer, it will crash and freeze up and not really work very well, right? But if you can close that one program that's locking it all up, most of our computers, these days have more RAM capacity. But back in the day, you maybe only had to run one thing on your computer at a time. Like, if you wanted to have a video call, you had to shut down literally everything else on your computer, And even though we've come a bit further from that, you can train the RAM in your brain. It's only ever going to be RAM. It's never going to be hard drive.
Unless you're like one of those very special bell curve people who have
Yes,
the
like
capacity to
people
do
who have
that.
an eidetic memory, which often it's like more of a curse. Have you, like a lot of people, right? We all think having a photographic memory would be great. And then you hear, you see, or you read an article about someone who actually has a photographic memory and they're miserable all the time. Maybe not all the time, but it's challenging.
Yeah, Jordan is like that. He doesn't necessarily have an eidetic memory for things that he like reads, although he does have an amazing memory, but for experiences he does. He says he remembers like every single horrible moment or embarrassing thing he's done since he was like a little child. Uh,
Whew,
I
that's
know.
a heavy load to carry.
Yeah, he's like, and I have the memory of a goldfish. I'm the opposite. I have almost no like autobiographical memories. He's like, I really hope Adair takes after you with that. I'm like, no, I have no memory. Anyway, I'm getting off topic, but you know, for the average regular person, you like the point is you can't carry all these things on your mind.
Yeah. And really, what I think that we're moving towards with all of this stuff in culture is about not just creating positive habits around wellness where you're, nurturing yourself on a regular basis, but really changing this root idea that many of us have, especially people who are socialized as men growing up, that if you are suffering, you have to shut up and push through it. If you're stressed, it's no one's problem but your own. And I think what all of this is building up towards is shame, making sure that we're taking the shame out of burnout, just flat out burnout, stress, overwork, etc. Where if you burn out or if you are crispy, that means that you have failed and you are less of a person and you are somehow unworthy of respect or love, because you're human and you had limits. Now, we're not saying that we just want people to be burning out left and right and you're like, oh, that's cool, don't worry. We want to be removing the shame from it so that people are more likely to talk about it and ask for help and create solutions before they hit burnout, rather than just hitting burnout and then suffering twice as much because you feel ashamed that you have hit those limits and are in burnout. And at this point, I think I just maybe need to leave the room or something, because that's so me. No, I'm kidding. But when I say you, this means you. I really mean me. This means me and so many other people that I know. There's so much shame associated with the idea of not being good enough because you burn out or you overwork, or not that you overwork, but like you overwork and hit a wall, you know?
Yeah, so true. And I think, this is something we've probably talked about in a former episode, and we'll probably talk about again in a future episode, is that it's very cyclical too. So we've talked about, identifying when people are at that 20% to burnout point to hopefully prevent it and empower them to talk about it. So they let us know when they're at that 20% and not like, obviously the goal is to avoid burnout. It's going to happen. Do we have an episode on dealing with burnout? We probably should. But that's not
We've tackled it I think a lot of the time we talk about like the situations that contribute to burnout, but we should probably do an episode just on burnout.
I'll add it to the list. But completing the cycle is as people get more energy and recover from burnout. You kind of referenced this earlier, like when you cut your hours down, people naturally start taking on more things as they feel more energized and rested, and then they get crispy again. So it's really important that you're constantly, even when people seem fine and everything's going well, like you said, is to check in with them. Like, should you be taking this on? And not in a way, and especially if it's normal, it won't be in a way that you're kind of criticizing their ability to do their job, but just in a compassionate, like, I care about you. We've been through this cycle a few times now, maybe a dozen times, hopefully not a dozen times, but burnout is cyclical.
And I will just say, if quote unquote, like this touchy feely, like being compassionate stuff doesn't appeal to you, well, I don't know. Again, maybe our podcast isn't the best for you, but also, like it can also be like a joking thing. Like it can be a camaraderie thing. It can be like, hey, is that really something you should take on? Like you can poke fun at each other about it without shaming each other and putting each other down.
Honestly, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, build a system around it. This is the same thing that you and I, we didn't necessarily feel comfortable with discipline, or especially early discipline, and calling people on their actions. So we built like a flag system saying, hey, these behaviors are unacceptable and these are the consequences. You can also build some sort of check-in, framework for wellness, where once a quarter you check in on this, or whatever your system is, or you have very specific identifying factors of burnout, and then a script to follow. So you're not really forced to dig into your mushy center that you ignore and pretend. I'm just kidding. But so this kind of moves into kind of the ideas for implementing it structurally, right? Where it's not on you to recognize these feelings and discuss them and have that kind of conversation where, I've had conversations, people where they start crying on calls, and I'm okay with that. But if that makes you feel really uncomfortable, maybe hire an HR person to do it. I'm just kidding. But first of all, it's good to push your boundaries and get close to those uncomfortable feelings. But like the next kind of thing that you can do is implement it structurally. So whether it be signs and symptoms and warning flags for burnout, or whether it be, asking once a month everybody what they're doing for wellness or what their current commitments are. And then there's also kind of the more typical ones I referenced before, like a 4-day work week. I know the entire state of Utah did this for public employees in 2008 and 2009. And the employees were so much more productive and less likely to miss work. And also just, I guess, not having to run operations for 5 days a week for all this. In those 2 years, it saved the state more than $4 million.
Yeah.
Like, not only was it more productive, it saved them millions. Microsoft actually did this in Japan as well, and found, other than employees being happier, which is nice, but, like, corporations don't usually care about that, they were actually 20% more productive working 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And that's an easy kind of structural thing where you can kind of set and forget and not have to check in. We don't necessarily say that everyone has to be a 4-day work week, but things like that, or, a 7-hour work day or whatever it may be, even if it's or a 6-hour work day, but like a shorter lunch or something. However you want, maybe not a shorter lunch. Lunches are important. But however, there's many, many ways to structure it, but that you can be more productive in less time.
Yeah. I just want to add to this, and I have been a fan of the 4-day work week and of other alternatives like that for years, long before I was an entrepreneur, because to me it just made more sense, because I noted that when I was in situations like that, I had those effects in myself, and other people I spoke to. So, a lot more anecdotal. But I've also been reading in some business books and stuff, for instance, like Clockwork by Mike Michalowicz and a few others, this different take on the same idea, where rather than just limiting the work week, maybe everybody takes, and one, I might be getting the timing a little bit off here, but I've seen 2 different versions that I think are really cool. One is having the whole company shut down. I think you mentioned something like this, like company whole weeks off. An example of this would be around Christmas. Some companies will shut down entirely for Christmas for a week or 2 or something, give everyone some time off. But also on larger scales with rotating individual longer times off. So on a super small scale, that could be a week off alternating where, different people are taking a week off. This is a few years ago now that I read this, but that could even be, like each person gets a full week off every 5 weeks or something. So you're having, or every 10 weeks, so that you're having rotating where at least once a quarter, one person is getting a week off. I've also seen it in the context of, especially if you're an agency leader and higher up, doing a month off. In the book Clockwork, for example, they say that a month is an amount of time that basically a full cycle of most business operations occur. So they suggest taking a month off, actually not just for your personal wellness as an entrepreneur, as a leader, but actually so that you can have the experience of training your team up so that you can walk away for a month. And that everything will run well. And then that's also a test run, because once you come back from that month off, you can see what was kind of working and not working. And this is getting into a slightly different concept than what we're talking about, but I think it fits in really well with this idea that taking planned time off can actually not just be good for the company, but propel the company forward. Because I've even heard of some companies doing this in an alternating way. So let's say the first year they work up to the owner having a month off. The second year they work up to the chief of ops taking a month off. Things like this, where you actually not only are giving people a full month off, which is quite a bit of time, but also getting the business stronger, because you're basically challenging yourself at regular intervals to make the business be able to run without a certain role for a period of time. And I think that's really valuable because, for example, like Celene, we're working her up right now to being mostly off for anywhere from 3 months to a year, kind of in an escalating or de-escalating way because she's going on mat leave. This has not only been kind of fun in some ways because we're making sure that the business can run without her or with her in a very limited capacity, but also in that time, she is going to be taking a week off, which, I think is really cool, so that you can also have like a week off with like your husband and your daughter before someone else enters the family, but also so that we can test how effective this is and how well before it's, crunch time. So just in this idea of structural implementation, I know I've kind of ranted a whole lot here, but you can get creative with it. You can get creative with it. And of course, one of our values is simplicity, which is solving multiple problems with one solution, or using one problem to solve another problem and stuff like that. If you're listening to this and feeling kind of overwhelmed and like, wow, like this is the way I've done things, this is the way every company I've been at has done things, I don't even know where to start with changing it up. It doesn't have to be like everybody gets a 4-day work week starting next week or something like that. You can work up to these kind of bigger shifts that are still enforcing people to take time off, but are actually maybe doing other things for the company as well, or fitting within the work that you're already doing, or, just solving problems. I'm a big fan of solving lots of problems at once. So I encourage you guys to get creative with it.
A really kind of less intimidating one that I think encourages people to get out and do stuff without, like if you're like, I don't know how I'm going to survive a 4-day work week or to try it, is I worked at a company that had a monthly flex day. So once a month, this is like not part of their regular vacation time. Each employee could take a day off to do some sort of community service or social work, which might be harder with COVID, but
Yeah.
But the idea is that it's not like the entire company is only working 4 days a week, but that people still have that extra day that they can use, even if they like want to go to the dentist and then maybe take the afternoon off or something and not feel bad about it or worry that they're going to lose a vacation day. Is another like really good idea for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that people, I hate to say this, but it's true. Most work situations suck so freaking much for the people in them. I say this all the time, not just anecdotally and on forums, but from the leader side where, you're having challenges with your team, from the team side, what they say about how people quit managers rather than jobs is so true. But I would also go so far as to say that people quit cultures. And a culture is often perpetuated by a manager or, a higher up or something like that. But just putting in a little bit of care for your employees to show you and show them that you're putting energy in towards their wellness in some way. StoryBrand pays for, they approach it structurally, but on a purely financial model, they pay for anyone's therapy. That's their thing. They want to make therapy not something to be ashamed of and help people get mental health support. So they'll pay for basically any mental health support. Whatever it is that you choose to do, whether it's culturally, whether it's structurally, whether it's both, just showing your employees that you care about their wellness breeds so much loyalty, so much dedication. I mean, obviously you have to be doing it authentically, not just like, oh yeah, like Amazon being like, oh yeah, we care about our employees, workers, so they get all this extra pay and sick days and all this kind of stuff, and then firing anyone who like actually looks for it. So sincerity and authenticity is key here. But you will be rewarded tenfold. Maybe not financially, although I think you'll start to see the impacts financially, but you don't have to get this perfect. You just have to try. And people really appreciate it. They really care. It builds so much in terms of a team. Now, of course, there's a flip side of that I thought you might want to talk about, Celene, but
well, the other thing is that, and you referenced this a little bit earlier in terms of hiring, but not everybody is actually capable of taking care of themselves and focusing on their wellness, whether it be because, you know, maybe they're not self-aware around it, they always take too much on, they're just stuck in that mentality, or, you know, they have other kind of issues going on. Who knows why it happens. We know why it happens, but there's many reasons. But if an employee is frequently showing up burnt out and exhausted and it's affecting their work, you know, like they're always grumbling and complaining about coworkers or projects, and they're missing deadlines, making mistakes, and they're not showing any signs of not only not wanting to change, but not doing the work to change. It's okay to recognize that they might not be a good fit for your team if you want a team that focuses on wellness.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that's critical. You know, I had one mentor who, when we were first navigating this idea of radical wellness and us and our team burning ourselves out, and all that, my mentor talked about when he had someone on his team that they literally needed to basically like sit down and open the calendar and be like, book, when are you taking a vacation? You know, and that sort of thing can be useful. I have certainly done that to people on the team, and they've done that to me, where it's like, okay, you say you're taking time. Where? When? Let's pull out the calendar. Let's look at your next week or two and figure out, what day are you taking off? When can you be doing that? Right? Again, kind of like what you've said, sometimes it seems to cross the boundary of what's appropriate as a boss. And it is up to you to kind of navigate where those boundaries are. But if you have a strong culture like that, it can be very helpful. But if you're constantly having to do something like this, you know, like if you're constantly trying to like drag someone out and it feels like you're teaching them new values, then that's probably a sign that they're not a good fit, or that you need to change your values. You know, like as we said, and I'm sure we talked about this before, we had this idea that we wanted everyone to work 30 hours a week or less and all this different type of stuff. And we realized that with overachievers, it's hard to dictate those kinds of things because they're too busy overachieving. And so we changed our value to radical wellness, where we ask that people put as much value and as much intensity into their wellness as they put into all the other areas of their life and their work. And it took us a little while to get to this, but people really like it. They really grabbed onto it. They really latched onto it. And that's great. You know, we were able to tweak it, but we've also had people on the team who maybe took on a second job when they had a full-time job or something like that, and they really just couldn't keep up with it, and they weren't willing to make those changes, and radical wellness just didn't work for them. They weren't a good fit. We had to let them go. It wasn't just, you know, like if we want that value on our team, we have to keep them on. It's that they were dragging the rest of the team down. Whether it was because they weren't doing their work, they weren't doing the work of just, you know, navigating their stuff and growing and changing, or whether it was because, you know, they just weren't a fit. It's really important to acknowledge that there's a line after which you can't keep dragging like a reluctant dog you're trying to take for a walk, you know, like sometimes you just have to like pick them up or go and go, or just leave them behind and go. Maybe if it's not your pup. I'm getting my
I was going to say, in real life, please don't abandon your dog.
Yeah, please don't abandon your dog. Yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to leave you guys with that thought. Yeah. Awesome. So as always, you know, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what your perspectives are. We want to hear whether whether you have tricks that we haven't heard about, what your journey has been like. Please contact us, you know, contact us directly. Go to our website, anansicontent.com, or just leave a comment or a review wherever it is that you're listening to this. You know, I hope that you're having a great day. I always say this, but I still continue to reinforce it. If you're not, hopefully you can just take a few moments today to calm, to chill, to find a little bit of peace and balance, create that for yourself. But also, if you are feeling crispy or burnt out, then I invite you today to just open up your calendar or open up your task list, whichever it is that, you know, is more pressing in your life right now, and ask yourself, is there anything on here that I can delegate, say no to, let go of? Are there any fires that I can just let burn to the ground so that I can, you know, save this other house over there? And just challenge yourself. You know, is there some way that you can lift things off your plate and just be a little bit less crispy, a little bit less burnt out, maybe get someone support to do that? I invite you to do it. I hope that you can create a great rest of your day.